Thank you for joining the Dell and Nutanix Simplifying the Hybrid Cloud for All Workloads Community Hour. Elevate Independent Customer-Led User Group is a Dell Technologies customers on multi-cloud journey to modernizing their IT infrastructure. We bring customers, partners, employees together to best share practices and network with expertise at our virtual and in-person events throughout the year. If you have any questions for the speakers today, please submit that through the Q&A function or in the chat. Our host today is Suzanne Pickett, the SVP of the Head of Infrastructure at Citizens Bank and Director of our Elevate User Group Board of Directors. Thank you, Suzanne, for joining us. I'll pass it on over to you to get started with our guest speakers.
And I'm going to surprise everybody really quick. We are waiting for Suzanne. We had some technical difficulties. My name's Ann Sari. I'm the Executive Director of the Elevate User Group. I know Gabby just did a brief overview of the user group community. We're excited to have everybody here today because we're going to have some great dialogue about Nutanix and Dell solution here. So we have some great guest speakers. And while Suzanne's getting settled with her presenter role on the Zoom, I'm going to pass it over to today's speakers so they can introduce themselves, and then we'll get started in the conversation here. And like Gabby said, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. Our speakers will be happy to answer all of your questions. We have a full house today. I know people are still joining. So why don't I pass it over to Lee? Do you want to kick us off here and introduce yourself? Then we'll go to Kris, and then Bhavik. Would love to hear from you too and do some quick introductions.
Yeah, terrific. And thanks so much. And actually, thanks all for joining. It's a delight to have you here. We've got a great set of things to talk about today. You know, this market is moving really fast. So my role is I'm the Senior Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing at Nutanix. Came here from a large company a lot of people know called VMware. And so we can talk a little bit about, what is it that Nutanix is doing and, how is it different in the marketplace and what we're doing together with Dell. It's an exciting time, and so looking forward to that going forward. So, Kris, over to you.
Hello, Kris Walsh. I started at Dell back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in '96, and was there for about 10 years. Did another 10 years at VMware, a little bit of consulting on the side. Was a Nutanix SE for a little over a year, and I've been doing this since 2017, and loving every minute of it. Glad to be here with you, Lee.
Terrific. Bhavik.
Hey, my name is Bhavik Desai. I'm not quite as old as Kris mentioned. I started in Nutanix about 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago. Time just flies by. My role at Nutanix is I'm a senior technical marketing engineer covering our core AOS, which is a Nutanix's operating system, and our NCI product, which is the Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure product.
Cool. Kris, I just want to say, right, I was calling out Dell when it was the server group was still in Breaker Lane, if you remember those days, right? So
oh wow,
long time back. So yeah, fun, lots of great experience together. So
well, thank you all for doing your introductions. I know we have a lot to get through today, and we also have a great demo. I know, Bhavik, that you're going to show with us later. So why don't we just kind of kick things off? Lee, let's start with you here. I know Suzanne's still getting situated, so once she gets her technical difficulties solved, she might slide in here. But if you want to just set the stage for us, let us know, what you're hearing from customers, the latest and greatest from Nutanix. I know the conversation will go from there. So why don't you just level set with the group here on what you're hearing?
Yeah, you bet, right? So one of the things that's happening, I mentioned a lot of, large rate of change rate at the moment, right? So we're certainly seeing that from the application side. You're seeing a tremendous amount of not just high performance applications, but Gen AI, of course. No conversation is complete without talking about how can you assimilate Gen AI. And as you start talking about new applications, one of the things that happens is you start talking about containers and containerization. How do you seamlessly go and put containers? I think a lot of people, actually, Kris, were either saw or were hoping that containers are going to be limited to the public cloud, and yet what we're finding is, containers are important around the speed of developing applications and deploying them in different locations with fewer dependencies on like OS dependencies, right? And so containers are coming. And as you watch, right, we see that 90% of organizations will have containers in on-prem environments, by 2029. That's from 15% today. That's a massive shift, right, in terms of how you go and think about for the future on container development. And then next, I mentioned on Gen AI, that means, how do you assimilate either GPUs or advanced CPU technologies, right? And our companies have a great history together of bringing the latest in silicon, because silicon comes first to servers. This is an important thing to think. There are 27,000 servers by my calculations sold every day. 27,000. And think about that. The reason why is because of the cloud, right? And if you think about the volume, right? So the ability to go and tap into the incredible cycle of innovation happening in servers is really important as you start thinking about how do you take advantage of the newest hardware innovations. This is one of the things we'll talk about together. We have a history at Nutanix and Dell working together over the last 15 years. And what's interesting and changed now, right, is we're now working together on a product that is integrated, fully supported, and sold by Dell, and jointly supported with Nutanix, where you can now get advantage of one of the key pain points. And let me leave you with this point before I turn it over to Kris, that the studies we're watching is 60% of customers are struggling with the amount of complexity that's coming into their environments. So you have a really interesting opportunity by standardizing on servers as your scale-out mechanism with all NVMe flash. You have the opportunity to go and basically have multiple workloads working in a common scale-out architecture. It works across the hybrid cloud, and you can support applications of all kinds. So it's a really interesting to think about simplifying the underlying infrastructure foundation you have, and then we can go and look at together how we can go make sure the apps that you have are going to be able to basically sing at scale. So, Kris, let me turn it over to you and see your thoughts, right? How does that match with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Day to day working with customers, it's helping them address those challenges and the ever present and increasing onslaught of complexity that they're having to cope with just makes it all the more important to simplify all the operations that they can. And that's what Nutanix and Dell bring together to these organizations. I've seen it time and time again. Change is never easy. There's been plenty of market forces that have pushed IT leaders to make important decisions about change. And the fact that we're able to make those decisions so much easier and then ultimately make their IT operations and everything that they can do easier day to day now so that they can tackle those more complex things is something I'm really proud to be a part of.
Yeah, yeah. Suzanne, you've made it. Thank you. Welcome for joining us.
Yeah, sorry everyone, technical difficulties. Sorry for being late to the party. Lee, welcome, and Kris, welcome, and of course, Bhavik for the demo later. It sounds like you guys went ahead and did some intros and kind of why we're here and talk about simplifying our hybrid cloud complexity scenarios and offering options to our network here. Real quickly, everyone, I'm sure Ann or Gabby mentioned it, but I'm Suzanne Pickett. I'm a board member on the Elevate Board of Directors. I'm also a customer with some of the same challenges that you have today. So I am really looking forward to hearing everything that Lee and Kris have to say, and just looking forward to the next generation of solutions out there. So Lee, if you haven't already, because I know I missed a few minutes, can you tell us a little bit about XC and how some of that integration is going to help us all figure out what's next for our hypervisor world?
You bet. I mean, if you start thinking about the Dell XC Plus, that's now Dell powered servers, right, integrated with Nutanix Cloud Platform software. And that includes everything from, the AHV hypervisor that we have into the AOS, which is the distributed storage stack. That's what actually aggregates, protects storage across individual nodes in a way that eliminates the need for an external separate standalone storage element and allows you to scale out in intervals. There's some pretty interesting ideas around how this all works, by the way. One of the early knocks on what this is called hyper-converged, right, which means you're basically using compute and storage and virtual networking, virtual security, right, integrated in a single stack, was that, hey, how do I know that the next node is giving me exactly the right amount of capacity or performance, right? What we found, by the way, is usually normally the way people bought storage, and a little part of my background, I spent 2 years at NetApp as well, right? Storage was such a big lift that usually people basically were running at around 15% utilization because they were over provisioning long into the future because they just didn't want to go and buy that again. And so the idea is, we're actually in bite-sized increments, and there's a lot of flexibility in the Nutanix architecture. It's really been a delight for me to uncover coming here. Things like the ability to have dissimilar nodes, right, in terms of dissimilar CPU technologies. Means you can feather in new CPU capabilities as they become available. The ability to have dissimilar capacity across different nodes means you've got the ability to do, I call them basically feather upgrades, or, as opposed to like forklift upgrading an entire cluster. And the ability to support compute and storage only nodes is a way to go and, importantly, not only scale the granular amount of compute and storage you have, but it can help you with licensing. And I'll explain why for just a second, right? For licensing that's licensed on a per core basis from an application standpoint, think Oracle, for example, right? That could get pretty expensive if every core and every node was being licensed when in fact not.
That's the first time hearing that Oracle is expensive.
We've seen a trend in this industry, right? Which is when software is expensive, we figure out how to go and take advantage of like new hardware, right? It's a really interesting game, right? So yeah, the idea was we're going to be able to go and contain that to individual compute-only nodes, provide that level of failover. It's some of the joint work we're doing together, Kris, right? That really makes this a partner or a customer-driven partnership.
Without a doubt. When I talk about XC, and then the XC Plus solution, I really like to roll it back a little bit and start with just what is the XC family, and that makes it a little bit easier to understand the evolution that we've taken with it. So I like to talk about it as a co-engineered subset of PowerEdge. That PowerEdge, I'm sure everyone on the phone knows and loves. You've got an R on the front of it. Most common ones are R660, R760. You take that R off the front and you replace it with an XC. Now you're getting everything you need to properly run and maintain a Nutanix HCI cluster. You've got all this Nutanix software pre-installed. You've got dedicated solution-aware support. You're going to get Nutanix certified parts, which is very important. We put that personality module in there so that when it interfaces with different management type solutions, whether it's Open Manage or Prism, they know what to do with it. And that integration with Prism gives you the one-click upgrades, one-click LCM updates, and brings everything into the Prism interface, so it's interacting seamlessly with those absolutely fantastic and thorough and stable LCM updates that a couple of years ago we actually enhanced. So part of that co-engineering is that you've got a dedicated team of people at Dell that are working all the time to make sure that they're optimizing the solution for Nutanix. And we took the best of Dell LCM updates and Redfish integration and enhance the LCM process so that you can save up to 70% versus the previous method. So Dell XC in and of itself is a solution dedicated for Nutanix HCI. And I say all that to say that's XC Core. And XC Plus is all of those wonderful things plus Nutanix licensing. I'm all about simplifying. And when you add in the ability to also procure Nutanix licensing along with the hardware, you're simplifying the procurement process, makes it easier to quote and order. One of the big things that I did not mention before was that solution-aware support. You're getting the best hardware provider and the best software support in the industry. It's absolutely, Nutanix support is absolutely amazing. I drive this with every single customer I talk to. You will never have a better support experience than you get from Nutanix. So XC Plus is shiny and new, but XC is the product. You can buy it with the licenses. You can buy it without the licenses. But just trying to simplify it there for them.
You know, I love what you're talking about
Sorry.
on LCM, that concept of lifecycle management and how you upgrade things, right? Because listen, it's, you know, putting something in the first time is one thing, right? But upgrading it, and particularly for making sure that you're, yeah, right, you're ready, like, to get to a remediated security position. That's a pretty important issue, right? So, you know, when we had things like Log4j or other issues, right? What we're finding is that customers with a single stack are able to upgrade the entire stack in one click. That's an important, that means you can get to a remediated security policy, right, within an hour, for example, as opposed to trying to update individual components, right, different siloed architectural elements. And so we're finding developers that are trying to figure out, like, hey, how do I get out of the, you know, just the urgent, hair-raising, you know, day-to-day operations, right, and get back to, like, doing some planning and new things. The idea that I can take a lot of this maintenance and just take it off the table is actually quite an interesting simplification.
Yeah, we said we might just have a conversation and go off script a little bit, and I can't help it, but you know, when I think about the folks, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. There are probably some VMware admins out there, and they have these hardening guides and everything that they've got to go through to get other hypervisors up to snuff. And when you compare a 300-page STIG versus a 30-page STIG, it's night and day, and it almost feels like the first days when I was back at VMware talking about how you can have multiple computers running on the same. It was those same kind of light bulbs I see coming on now, where it's like, you mean I don't have to go through 300 pages and 75 different scripts just every time I go through these bigger updates to harden my environment? And it really, I just love seeing those eyes light up and make a difference for those customers.
Yeah,
I have a question. Oh, sorry,
ahead.
Lee.
Sure.
Did you want to respond to that?
No, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I was, you know, something that Kris had mentioned, and I think you had mentioned earlier, was really about that integration, but also the focus on, I think, something that's pretty important to a lot of us today, which is migration, right? The migration away from our current platform into what's next. And so I know we have a demo coming, and so I don't want to give any of that away. But I do want to ask the question because, well, I want to know what do you see from a simplification process, and what tools are you bringing to the table today? What solutions are you bringing to the table today to help us all get from where we are today to maybe a different platform?
We got nothing for
Right.
you.
Oh man, I probably should have not asked that question then, Kris, right? You said go off script, so I threw it out.
Just to your point, what I hear you saying is a lot of customers have had frustration in the past. Migrations have been such a pain, and if they involve, you know, Lee and Bob, feel free to chime in here, but the time and effort and project management and just the heavy lift that it takes to move from X to Y has been historically very frustrating for a lot of customers and caused issues, quite frankly. Having something that takes care of that and can alleviate that, and coming to them with these things that Nutanix brings to the table for us just gives me a joy to be able to work with them on that. So I'll tee you up on that, Lee.
Yeah, a couple of things. You know, one of the things that's important, I think, right, is that you have choice always. You know, people talk about lock-in. I never listen. There's always lock-in in anything that you buy, right? So what's really important is, what are the switching costs? I think that's what we're talking about. Like, how hard is it to go and say, if I decide on something, like, can I change to something else, right? So one of the things that's interesting, good question on there about, like, how does this compare to VxRail, right? So I'll give us one simple element of how it's different is, you know, VxRail is always dependent on vSphere. That's a basic requirement underneath, right? vSAN is part of vSphere, in fact, right? From how it's architected. This is different, right? We actually architected a storage stack that's independent of the compute layer. That's different. And the reason was in the early days, right? We actually ran only on vSphere. If you look at
Only one.
yeah. So, and we still have, roughly 30% of our customers run our storage capabilities, all the data services we have, snapshots, replication, DR, those things can run in a hybrid cloud. Like all those elements can run with vSphere today. And I said, about 30% of our customers do that today. That's a fast shrinking number, by the way, right? It was 50% when I joined the company just 3 years ago. So you're watching customers start to look and say, the hypervisor is actually turning into more of a commodity, but I have the choice. If I cut my teeth on vSphere and I know vCenter, right, you can go and use those and run our stack. However, what we're finding, right, is that, as I mentioned, a lot of customers are looking to go and say, hey, can I get an alternative to de-risk some of the industry dynamics that are in play right now? So that level of choice means that you can go and choose and move. So we have a tool that's probably the most easy, best named product in the industry, right? It's called the Move tool, right? And so this is I know.
Wait, I don't understand. What does it
Yeah,
do?
exactly. Yeah, this is where I don't know if marketing was involved in this one. I think it was just a straight engineering call, right? But anyway.
Yeah, right? There's no way marketing was involved.
Yeah, we would have come up with like transition or transform or something like that. But no, it's called the Move tool because what it does is it takes ESXi-based VMs and converts it in real time, right, to AHV form factor, right? And so you could do that. You have to move the storage, right? That's true. But if you're not running Nutanix today, but if you are running Nutanix, it's basically as simple as saying the VMs are now converted to a new format. And so that Move tool, which is free, by the way, and lots of people using that at very large scale, by the way, including some of the largest financial institutions, some of the largest.
Is it like over 50,000 last quarter or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's really picking up because customers are looking, saying, hey, how do I go and manage my risk? And by the way, right, you can go both ways. If you wanted to go back, you can do that, right? So it's not one thing that's just like one or the, it's that level of choice where the Nutanix is really known for. And so the idea that this Move tool is a way for you to go, and we have sizing tools and other things, right? So you can make sure that for the applications you have, this would be the right move. And so you basically use that as a way where you can move from an ESXi environment, and you can move that ESXi environment, by the way, it could be even VMC. It could be in the public cloud, for example. And so you've got all this flexibility, right, to say that I can go run the same stack. And one of the things that happens once you choose servers as the underpinning architectural element that you're going to build on, like every modern cloud, by the way, right? Then you have the flexibility to go and scale into the public cloud. That's a hybrid story, we call it. Or importantly, it turns out that HCI generally, and Nutanix specifically, scale down extremely well to the edge. And what IDC is talking about right now is that 50% of data is going to be generated at the edge. The AI that we're talking about, in many cases, like in retail or manufacturing or even healthcare environments, or ships, right? You can start seeing
containers.
You're going to want to start having the logic or the AI follow the data as opposed to the other way around. So our view is we're going to see a more distributed world over time, and that the best way to service that will be to have servers all the way from the edge to the data center to the public cloud that are running a common stack where you can choose things at will, right? You can mix and match and move things where they are optimally located. One of the things we're finding out, right, is that customers who thought the cloud was going to be flexible said, well, it was flexible, but it was pretty expensive. And so the idea that you can optimally locate this on-prem environment, right, is surging right now as customers are concerned about cost, complexity, and then most importantly, compliance and the data security. And so these elements are all driving for this integrated story that we have. So long-winded answer, Suzanne, but Kris, what did I miss?
I would just say that the vast majority of the customers I talk to, they still have stuff on-prem, and that communication, that networking piece back and forth. I mean, how many conversations have you had about that?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
There's a reason why people stay on-prem, and there's it's just not just connect to the cloud. It's just easy. No.
Right.
Well, we all know the complexities behind that, which is, obviously why we're here today. And I was wondering, since you mentioned the networking piece, Kris or Lee, do we want to perhaps answer one of the questions in the Q&A, which is, could we speak a little bit more at a high level, of course, we have a few minutes here before the demo, on what the networking piece looks like and how Nutanix addresses that networking piece for XC Plus?
Yeah, I can open up a little bit and you go from there. Or Kris,
Right.
you want to get you look like
I didn't I didn't ask the question exactly as it was written. It's how does Nutanix operate? For example, how does it provide network capabilities in a hybrid environment? Let me phrase it that way.
Yeah, so I'll take a first stab and just do a couple of things, right? So first off, once you have a software-defined server-based system, you can start looking at how you implement security across the full stack. I'll talk about that. It's not specific to network, by the way, right? This means you can have things like for security for data at rest, security for data in flight, right? You can have RBAC, right? So role-based access controls, right? To make sure that you've got access controls. You can have things like our file access and file analytics. You can also start thinking about how I do network virtualization. This is an important element for us because as a company, right, that allows us to move past the perimeter-based model of security into a zero trust model. What we're finding is when you move to these scale-out architectures, and I'll take a moment aside here to say, the reason that these scale-out architectures based on servers are even possible is because of flash, right? What flash does is for the very first time, storage latencies are less than network latencies. That's what changed in the model. In the past, you had a separate storage subsystem because disks were so slow. Remember when you used to have that little disk light on your laptop, right? That would tell you, like, hey, my disk is spinning, right? Like, where is that? That's gone. Why? Because you don't need it anymore, because flash has taken the performance element out of storage. So you've got this new ability to build a scale out system. And now you can start putting in security so that you can start managing what we call east-west traffic. So think of north-south traffic as basically, from the server to the user, if you will, right? If you start thinking about the east-west traffic is how do you basically protect all the state across the systems? And so we started thinking about that and the ability for a bad actor to come in and now start being able to manage that across now what we call microsegmentation. And that's an important part of the flow security element that we have. And so I'll leave it, maybe turn it over to Kris. I know we'll have opportunities for other breakouts, and Bhavik may want to add something to it later. But Kris, other things you want to add?
Just at a more fundamental level, the way Nutanix brings your environment to you as an end user, it's policy based. You're working in an interface that enables you to orchestrate and automate. It doesn't just enable me. It sets up the stage and the environment so that when you deploy your VMs, all of your policies are getting applied, and you don't have to worry about, did I go into that VM and did I make that setting? It's just a natural part of the execution of operating in a Nutanix environment. So the ease of being able to make that happen, you can't compare it to anything else. Nutanix is heads and shoulders above.
One of the interesting
sorry, Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I have a lot to say. So
I'd rather hear from you than me. So go ahead.
One of the things that when people actually get to this, right, and start looking at how to manage HCI, and particularly for high performance applications, our top application is databases, by the way, just so you know, right? Yeah. 91% of our customers run databases. The top one is SQL Server, which makes sense by volume, but it's even certified down to like SAP HANA, the highest performance in-memory databases, right? So the thing that's interesting is when you start doing performance tuning, and when do you do that, by the way? It's when things aren't working, right? It's the most stressful time ever, right? The time you start getting like tuning performance. If you're working with independent systems, now you have to get your experts across storage, compute, virtualization, and applications and networking.
Get them in a room
together. You've been in this room. You're all in a room. The guy goes, first they look to the the storage guy, what did you change, right? Yeah. Right. And they go through this process, right? And the problem is it's your best people because they are trying to understand the complex interaction of these separate, highly tuned systems, but they're tuned for themselves. When
Yep.
you move to an HCI model, the management model is completely upended. What you do now is you look, it's not quite the application, but pretty close. You're at the VM level, right? Or container level in Nutanix, right? And you can now look at resources and resource utilization, any aberrations or anomalies.
Holistically across, yeah.
Exactly. And so you're looking at it. That means you can use a generalist to go and say, hey, you know, I'm looking at like CPU and RAM utilization here and IO, and here's what I notice, right, about this. And I can make remediations in software as opposed to going back to go figure out how to go and retune like a separate storage system or a fiber channel switch, right? So
Right.
this is one of the things, right, that is really interesting about how you change the management model that becomes more closely where I'm looking at what the user at the end of the day cares about, which is what's happening to my app.
Right.
Yeah. And
Actually frees
yes,
up those database people to make the performance tunes that
Right.
make an even bigger difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good discussion going on in the chat as well. And, you know, Jay, I think Jay said it, you know, policy as code isn't just a buzzword anymore. It's really how we get to cloud. That's how we manage cloud, whether cloud is on premises or public. So
Right.
what I really want to do is make sure Bhavik has time for a demo. So if you guys are open to it, what I would like to do is just go ahead and do the demo. And I think that will answer some of the questions we have out there. And if not, that'll give us time to answer some of those questions.
Love hearing from Bhavik. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to hear from
Do it.
Bhavik too. I promised myself that I wouldn't that I would get this one thing out that I
Okay.
feel like I
Do you have a
resonate
confession?
with a lot of yes, I've been meaning to tell you. The thing that I see a lot of customers not that they don't understand yet or haven't quite have gotten their arms around is that Nutanix was founded by the folks that developed the Google file system.
Google Files. Yeah.
It's the software-defined data center inside of Google. And they said, you know what, we think we can productize this and we can bring it to the masses. And when you operate in that environment, they are truly giving you a cloud-like environment where you're providing services, and that is the difference between us and other HCI solutions. It's that fundamental, you know, what they were founded to do, which is provide that cloud. And so when you look at the way everything expands and how you can operate on-prem with your cloud or in AWS with your same cloud in that provider's hardware, or in Azure, or in soon to be GCP, it just makes so much sense to me that I like to drive that point home with customers.
Yeah. I mean, just having a single management plane.
Unified across all clouds.
Yep. Yep, for sure. I
Thank
agree
you
with
for
that.
letting me get that out.
Off your chest.
Confession noted. All right, Bhavik, you want to kick us off with a demo? Demo day, everybody.
All right, let's make it happen. So that was a great overview that Lee and Kris went over, right? And I'm gonna show some of that stuff in the demo over here, and probably I was going through some of the questions in the chat, and I'll try to address some of the questions through the demo as well. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen, make sure it's visible. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, perfect. So the first thing that I'm gonna walk through or demo is the move environment, and I've actually gone ahead and captured the steps because moving of bits and bytes takes a long time. All right, so I've captured the steps, but I'll just walk through as to how the process looks from moving from an ESXi to Nutanix AOS or AHV cluster. So the first thing that you do is set up your source and a target. So for that, you would go to Add Environment. First, we'll set up the target environment, which is Nutanix AOS. And as you will see over here, that we can provide movement of VMs, not just from ESXi to AOS, but we can go from Hyper-V and even from AWS and Microsoft Azure. So the move tool has the capability to migrate VMs off of those technologies onto Nutanix AOS and AHV as well. So let me go ahead and select Nutanix AOS. You provide your environment name, you provide your information for your Prism Central, which I'll walk through after the move demo, whether you're the FQDN or the IP address, provide the username, password, and then add that into your environment. And then in the same way, you would go ahead and add your ESXi environment. Again, provide your vCenter credentials, provide username, password, and add that in. So once your environments are added in, like, so say, for example, the ESXi environment, it goes and queries that vCenter and sees how many VMs are available. So there's 34 VMs. My destination has 31 VMs. And as you would see over here, in this demo environment, I had an EC2 instance as well, a Microsoft Azure instance as well, as added as an environment as well. So now what the next step is we create a migration plan in terms of moving of the VMs. So let's go ahead and do that. Go name this one ESXi to AHV. Once you give it a name, we select the source, which in our case is VMware vCenter, the destination cluster. So once you query the Prism Central, so Prism Central is our multi-cluster management plane, and it will basically give you the list of all the Nutanix individual clusters that are available inside the Prism Central, right? So as Lee mentioned, you can move from off of VMC to NC2 as well. So if you have an NC2 cluster as a destination, that will show up over here as well. So here, let's select this Andor cluster, and that will populate your container. That we just use the default container over here, or you can create your own specific container that you want. Once you do that, that will give you a list of VMs on the source that were available, right? So this will allow you to select multiple VMs or select one VM at a time, depending on how we want to stage the migration. So let's go ahead and select this particular VM, which is a Windows 19 VM. Once you do that, then the next step is providing the mapping of the networks between the source and the target. So we've identified the source network as already presented. We'll go ahead and select the corresponding target network that we want the VM to move over. So there was a question in the chat around, can we retain IP addresses, static IP addresses? So you can definitely do that with the move tool, making sure that the network is the same flat level network where the IP address can be moved from one place. So you can keep your static IP addresses on the VMs if needed, which is what the screen talks about, right? So you can retain your static IP addresses. If you want to uninstall VMware tools on the target VMs, you can go ahead and do that. What will also happen as part of the move process is, well, we will install Nutanix guest tools on our side from a VM's perspective, which will help manage the VMs on the Nutanix side. We'll provide the Windows credentials next, and then give additional things that you can, if you want to retain MAC addresses for your source VMs, you could do that. You can set up the configuration of the VMs. You can change it if needed in terms of how much memory and CPU. And then you can set individual settings for the VMs to be configured as in how you want from the movement to happen. And once you do that, we would go ahead and save and start the migration. So what happens at this point is we will actively start, we will take a snapshot, and it will actually start moving the data by the storage of the VM from the ESXi side to the AOS side in the background. Once it starts moving all the data over, it will validate the plan, and it will transfer all the bits and bytes over to the Nutanix side. Once it's reached that point, what happens is it will reach into a state called ready to cut over. So, and at this point, even when the additional updates are happening on the source, those are over a period of time getting copied over to the destination. And whenever you as an administrator are ready to cut over the VM, you will just select that VM and do a cut over. What will happen at this point of time is on the source, we will go, the move tool will go and shut down the source VM. It will quiesce the VM and also basically unplug the virtual NIC from the source VM so that it doesn't get booted back up. And once it does that, it will move the state of the VM onto the destination and power the VM on the destination side. So that way, by unplugging the VNIC on the source side, the VM doesn't come back up. But just in case if something happens during the move process where the VM doesn't come up on the target, you can go back to the source and attach the VNIC again and bring the VM back up again if needed. So that's on a very high level how you would go about doing the migration of VMs from the source to cluster, right? You can select multiple VMs. You can stage them in terms of which groups of VMs you want to move from at one particular time. You can set up multiple move instances to kind of parallelize the operation as needed as well. So one of the questions that was also asked in the chat was, what about the other procedures and policies? I mean, at times, there are many complex environments where the migration needs to happen, right? So for that, we have customers who've used our migration services. So our services organization has been actively involved with a lot of customers over the past 6 to 12 months, where they help customers plan the entire migration out in terms of how are we going to set up the procedures and policies, transfer it over from ESXi side to the Nutanix side. How does it look? And then go about doing the actual migration. So once the migration is done, let me log into my Prism Central. So folks who have not seen what a Nutanix environment looks like, this is what we call Prism Central, which, as I said, is a multi-cluster management tool. Think of this as your AOS Cloud Console, right? So it basically gives you insight into your entire infrastructure, and you can deploy services and capabilities on your clusters as needed. So quickly, what I'll do over here is I've actually deployed a VM beforehand, but let me go ahead and actually go and create a new VM. So let's say the test VM 1, 2, 3. You can set up things like enable memory overcommit, enable APC. Advanced process capability is basically your EVC mode in ESXi. So you can determine which particular CPU generation you want to base your VM onto, which will help of migration of VMs across cross clusters. So we'll just keep it at the default. Attaching disks, you can either have, if you have an image service, if you have an image which is already populated on the cluster, you can select that image, which in my case, I'll select this Windows image, save it. You can attach a virtual NIC to it, which is over here. And then you can also do things like secure boot and attach VTPM VMs for Windows Defender Credential Guard and Windows VM capabilities. One thing which I want to show over here is we have something called, so before we had something called storage policies. You would create these VMs on something on containers, right? So every VM management or the cluster management capability happened from a container perspective. We are transitioning that from that to a per VM configuration management. So you can set up storage policies on the VM on a per VM basis. So things like the replication factor, QoS, encryption, all the data efficiency features, you can set it on a per VM basis using storage policies. So we provide a default storage policy, or you can define your custom policies, which I'll quickly show, and tie it back to the categories. So once you do that, it's as simple as this in creating a VM. So very, very similar to how we would go about doing it through vCenter and ESXi. I mean, an administrator who has used ESXi vCenter, the process looks very familiar to them in terms of how you would go about deploying VMs. This was done manually. We have tools in NCM called self-service, which can allow you to basically create blueprints of your application and do automated deployment of VMs once those blueprints are defined. Let me quickly go ahead and also talk about what capabilities you can do while creating these VMs, right? So we have a concept of categories. Categories are basically something similar to VMware tags. What categories provide you is a way to tie, is basically a name value pair, and you can define what those categories are. So say, for example, I have a protection policy over here where I define what that protection policy is. So I've this category is, and I've attached it to a protection policy. So I've defined multiple categories over here. So one's for protection policy, one's for storage policy, one's for security. So let's go and look at some of the policies which are tied to that. So the protection policy.
I personally wish we had given you more time for a demo. But I also know we only have 1 or 2 more minutes. So I just want you to have that time check. And if you can in your last couple minutes, let's focus on the importance of your confessions, if you will.
Yeah, I'll quickly wrap this up. What you can do is once you have those categories, they are tied to these policies, which are, you can select your protection policy over here, your security policy, which is over here, which was a question in the chat around how do you do microsegmentation. So this is a security policy that determines your incoming traffic to a VM and outgoing traffic. You can define that. So when you're creating these VMs, you can attach those categories to the VMs, and those VMs are deployed with these policies automatically applied to them. And then there was
very cool.
There were quickly 30 seconds. There were quite a few questions in the chat around networking. So on Nutanix platform, you can basically create a VLANs. We have a concept called virtual private clouds, which are basically independent, isolated IP address spaces that are logically isolated virtual networks that you can set up in your environment. So there's a lot of capabilities that the platform provides out of the box for administrators. I can keep going more, but I would just want to be cognizant of the time and make sure that we have questions.
I think probably the answer to that is let's have you all back. We've got a lot of questions in the chat, and honestly, I think there are enough questions around, okay, we can get the VM moved, but now what do we do around our more complex networking, our more software-defined networking? And probably too many questions for us to tackle today. One question that came up that I thought you all might be able to answer very quickly was, does the move tool only allow for migrations to Nutanix targets?
Good question. So the destination would be a Nutanix cluster, which right now is AOS. But as you all know, we are working to support external storage, PowerFlex, pretty soon.
A different question, though, actually. The destination actually doesn't have to be Nutanix. I mean, Nutanix has to be on one side of the wire, right? So you would be going from a Nutanix to something else. You could do that, by the way, right? So you could go Nutanix to, we've supported Hyper-V or ESXi. So it doesn't have to be, I guess the point was, but it is specific to, you would want Nutanix on one side of the wire for there.
Gotcha.
You are bringing up a point, though, that around support for PowerFlex, and I know we want to make sure we do talk about that at some point. But anyway, it sounds like Suzanne, you had one other question to go through.
No, that was what I was going to pick, actually.
Oh, okay, great.
So yeah.
Yeah, I might talk about that for a minute, right? Because that's a market departure from Nutanix, right? In the past, right, all of our solutions have been tied to integrated HCI, like within a local system. And that's different than VCF, for example. You can have supplemental storage, right, tied in, right, with a local management domain and tie that to an external element. And that was actually in part because, to give the same experience, that LCM and the upgrades and everything like that, having an HCI cluster is always kind of the thing, made it an easier problem to, frankly, right, to do that. But we did announce last year that, and excited to go and be working towards the launch of support for Nutanix Cloud Platform with PowerFlex. And so this is the first time we're supporting now storage. Now, there are some ways, by the way, you can say, well, how is it possible that you're doing that, right? So we're taking these as an IP-based storage. That simplifies the HCL dramatically, right? From trying to go do like fiber channel things so it's IP-based scale out storage system. And then what you'll see is, Nutanix is then intent on bringing our value outside of the distributed storage stack, which in that case is provided by PowerFlex. And so you can start to see, so there'll be our hypervisor elements, there'll be some of our security and networking elements, virtualized networking capabilities, as well as the management and domain. That's going to be an integrated solution between the two companies, something to watch out for. And we position that as the first of things to come.
And on that note, my understanding is, it looks like Gabby joined us from Member Services.
Oh, hey.
I believe she's going to talk about some discount codes that are available for .next.
Next is coming up. Yeah.
It's coming up, and
You know it.
so is Dell Tech World. Things are moving pretty fast.
Yeah.
My key takeaways really, really fast as we wrap up. What I'm hearing is there's options and flexibility and portability in the solution, which I think is a maturity point for the product and solution. So congratulations on that, Lee. I think it's pretty exciting. Another takeaway is I think a lot of people are really excited about the migration capabilities, but need to better understand, especially if they've adopted NSX, say, for microsegmentation. How does that play? How does that move over? And I know we couldn't cover that here, and I know there were a lot of questions about that. And we'll, for those of you who have reached out in the chat, we'll get your Nutanix people to reach out to you. And, even Lee, something you said that really struck home with me is that you don't need the same CPU, that you've got that capability. And for someone who just all of us went through supply chain challenges in the last few years, where obtaining same was maybe not so easy.
Right.
I think that's a great takeaway as well. With that, a couple things I don't want us to forget to mention. Test drives, that sounds exciting. And discount codes. So before we hand it over to Gabby, does anyone want to touch on test drives?
I'll do it as the non-Nutanix.
I'll hear you say.
Test drives are absolutely amazing. We had a slide. I don't know if I have it here, but it's Bhavik, what's the URL? It's just nutanix.com/one platform.
Yeah, one dash platform. Yep.
We'll put it in the chat. You go in, you choose a scenario or even a product, and then you get a live environment to play in for 2 to 4 hours. You can choose to follow the script, the follow me along, or you can go off script and just play around. And you got 2 or 4 hours to play around with it. And you want to do it again? Deploy another one.
It sounds awesome.
Absolutely amazing.
We have various experiences.
Thanks,
we have various experiences in the test drive platform. So if you want to learn more about a lot of questions on networking, right? So we have a dedicated test drive for networking as to how you go about setting up VLANs,
there you go,
IPAMs, VPCs, all the good stuff.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I encourage everyone on this to go check out the Nutanix test drive capability. And with that, I'm going to thank you, the three of you, for joining us today, and your entourage in the background handling some of the chats. It was great to see some familiar names there. And with that, Gabby, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bhavik, Lee, Kris, and Suzanne today for all your support. And we want to just thank Dell Technologies, Nutanix, and Intel. And we just want to make sure that you don't forget to share your feedback from today's webcast. And then also don't miss out on Nutanix.next exclusive registration code, and to also join the Elevate user group community on May 7th at our first ever reception at .next. So we look forward to seeing everyone. Our next webcast will be held on March 20th. We hope to see you there. And on behalf of the Elevate user group, we and our board of directors have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.